Well, it's Thursday, June 30th, 2016 at noon Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Live Special Edition. I'm your host, as usual, Kent Casello, and I'm coming to you live from the banks of the lovely Red Cedar River on the beautiful campus of Michigan State University. On today's live broadcast, we're talking about assessing and managing rapidly emerging PR issues. So as usual, this special edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. And we've got two of the best and brightest minds in education that are going to be joining us today. The live broadcasts on Higher Ed Live allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in our industry today. Today's live viewing experience is powered by Maestro. Maestro is the premier marketing tech platform for broadcasters. As many of you know, all episodes on Higher Ed Live are free and accessible in the video archives, and you can find those at higheredlive.com. That's higheredlive.com, all one word, and in podcast format if you're looking in iTunes. Today's episode is made possible by PRSA's Counselor to Higher Education Professional Interest section. A little bit about the Counselors to Higher Ed section. That group, and I'm a member of that group, the section provides higher ed PR professionals high-quality in-person programs. We do publications, and we do virtual networks to help promote the value, power, and the appropriate role of public relations for our institutions. Members of the PRSA Counselor to Higher Education section have exclusive access to analysis, trends, and tools to provide the strategic leadership in public relations at the best colleges and universities all across the country. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Well, let's get on with the show here today. So joining me for the show are two experts from UNC-Chapel Hill. They are Jim Gregory and Natalie Visueta. Say hi to everybody, folks.
Hey. Hey, how you doing?
Doing just fine. Thanks for joining us. Let me tell everybody a little bit about both of you. So Jim is the media relations director at UNC-Chapel Hill. And since he's been there, him and his team have expanded the university's media outreach while simultaneously addressing a whole bunch of complex issues, because unfortunately, we've got to see your good work lately, Jim, of you and your team getting some national media attention, everything from some NCAA investigations and, of course, challenges to academic freedom and campus diversity issues. So hang in there. I know those are just a few of the issues, but you're getting a lot of work in those areas right now. Before joining UNC, Jim was an Army officer, retired after 22 years. And his last assignment, he served at the Pentagon as the spokesperson for two different undersecretaries of defense. And some of the highlights there were 2011, talking about the bin Laden operation, some North Korea missile threat operations, some operations in Iraq and Syria. So I think Jim knows a little bit about assessing and managing rapidly emerging PR issues. So welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you.
Natalie is the social media director at UNC-Chapel Hill, so she runs the social media team there and runs all of their platforms, connecting to all, if you read her bio, you'll see all platforms to all audiences. And she works also with all the communication staff across the institution to give strategic direction on social media to all of the offices and communicators at UNC-Chapel Hill. Before that, she spent about 10 years as a reporter, Associated Press in St. Louis and New Orleans, and Baton Rouge and Austin, Texas, covering state government and politics. And we are glad when we have somebody with that pedigree that we can steal them over to the higher education side. So good to have you joining us today too, Natalie.
Thank you.
So as I think about this and thought about the expertise that you two are going to share with us today, I thought about the media landscape and how it's more complex now than it arguably has ever been. Anybody can be a reporter. and it seems that anybody has the tools or the ability to get an issue going, a dynamic that we may not have had in the past, or people didn't have in the past. And then we throw in social media into that mix, where we've got a channel that's bi-directional, that requires some conversation. That makes us as PR professionals have to think about the content and how we engage our audiences in a whole different way. And then when we amp that up to the next level, when we're dealing with an issue or a crisis, all of that happens or has to happen at what I tell my team here, it happens at ludicrous speed. Speed just like we've never experienced before. So when we think about the elements of, we've got a relentless communication environment, communication is instantaneous, little problems can become big problems very quickly. We as communicators often find out about problems late, and our leaders and institutions are being called to respond to an increasing number of issues that folks may have never even heard about before. Jim and Natalie, can you take some time and talk us through how you and the UNC-Chapel Hill's communication team have structured your operation to kind of manage these rapidly emerging PR issues?
Yeah, sure. So I've been here about 16 months since I left the Army, and during that time we've had the opportunity to exercise our processes, and we've put a few of them in place that have helped us quite a bit, I think.
I like the way you said that, that you had the opportunity to exercise.
Hey, that's the way we got to roll.
Every day is an opportunity, right?
It's always an opportunity, right? So we had an opportunity just this past week. And I'll get into that just a little bit. Really what I want to talk about is I'm going to use two that we had over the past year as kind of platforms for discussion. I'm really going to get, I want to focus more on the processes, but I have to set the stage a little bit. And one of them is the Literature of 9/11 freshman seminar that we had arise in late August of last year. And the other one's a pro and anti-abortion rally that occurred last August. And that was kind of more of an event-driven. And then, as I mentioned, this past week we had a situation arise on microaggressions. A blog post that was posted in a national or an online outlet picked it up, and then it went to national news and was a little bit misreported about what it really was, but nonetheless, it's something that we had to come together and address very rapidly. But first, I'm going to get into the 9/11 situation, I'll call it. So shortly after classes began in the fall semester, I received a request from an incoming freshman from an outlet that I hadn't heard of at the time. I'm well aware of it now, about a freshman seminar class that was supposedly teaching about 9/11 from the perspective of the terrorists. So this is in August. As you know, that September 11th is coming up. I knew that was an issue, but my initial response after doing some basic research was that his assumptions were incorrect. I told him that we didn't have an official stance on the class because I was very sensitive to academic freedom and the importance of that, especially here I think at any university here, especially at UNC-Chapel Hill. Again, I hadn't heard of the outlet. The author was an incoming freshman. He hadn't taken the course, and so that was how I initially responded. But then several days later, he ran his article, and very quickly a national outlet picked it up online, and then they picked it up on their broadcasts, on the morning shows, ran on various daily shows. It became kind of a thing, and it was really as the country was turning its thoughts towards the 9/11 remembrance, and a lot of outrage was directed at the university because of this story and the misconceptions that this article had generated. So first, what were the challenges that we had to address? I mean, it's arguable that perhaps we should have seen it coming more. I was only 5 or 6 months into my position at that time. There weren't a lot of processes in place to address something like that. We definitely underestimated the possibility of it becoming a national story at that time. We didn't have the process to inform the key stakeholders, and I think that's one of the important things here is making sure that for us, the Board of Trustees, I mean, Board of Regents at other universities, faculty, cabinet members, alumni, legislature members via the government relations team that we had. We also didn't have a process to gather the necessary facts. You know, certainly that's 2015. I mean, we knew that news evolved rapidly, but at a university, sometimes, especially in August, it's just that sense of urgency isn't really there, and the process wasn't there, certainly. And our information dissemination process was a bit impromptu. Who needs to know? Do I have their phone number? Do I have their cell phone number? Can I get a hold of all the people that need to know so that I can get them or get from them the information I needed? Now I'll let Natalie go into maybe some of the challenges she's been experiencing on social media.
So for this particular story, Jim and his team had let us know that it was coming. So we were prepared. And just for some background, UNC has, my team is a 3-person team, which is very fortunate for us. So there are 2 people that are on, well, the 3 of us are on social media all day, but 2 of them are watching it very closely all day. And then we rotate night and weekend shifts. So pretty much during waking hours, we have someone monitoring and engaging on social media. So we knew this story was coming, and we knew coming into the weekend that we needed to be paying attention. Philip Jones, who was on my team, was working that weekend, and he saw the story get picked up by a national news blog and alerted myself and a few others to say, hey, just want to let you know it might be coming. One of the things that we realized, though, is that when we are watching social media, just like many of you, we're kind of paying attention to not only what's being said, but who's saying it and what reach that they might have. So particularly if it's a blog that has 10,000, or a Twitter account attached to a blog that has 10,000 followers, we're going to take note versus someone who has 15 followers. So that's one thing that we are paying attention to. So that happened on a Saturday. The next day, the story appeared on a talk show, and our mentions went through the roof. We heard a lot of people, or we saw a lot of people talking about us and not in such a favorable light, and the story just continued to grow on social media. So the monitoring wasn't such an issue for us. It was just making sure that we knew who to reach out to and how quickly to reach out to them.
Mm.
So let me take a quick break here. We're talking with UNC-Chapel Hill's Jim Gregory and Natalie Visueta. If you've got questions for them, hashtag HigherEdLive, hashtag HigherEdLive. If you've got questions for Jim or Natalie. As you guys work through that as an example, talk to us about what you learned and what processes did you put in place for your next opportunity, as Jim said.
Well, so, you know, I mentioned it was 2015. We certainly knew that it was a 24/7 news cycle, but here at the university, I mean, we cannot take the speed of media stories spreading for granted, and it's important to react to emerging issues quickly and directly. So we determined that we needed to predetermine who would do what before an issue arises. For example, we have an on-call person that is available to media when 24/7, and we rotate that amongst the staff. But that on-call person now has very specific responsibilities when an issue emerges. So I'm going to share real quick a slide. It's a flowchart that we developed, and it just kind of goes through a process that we have now. And can you see that, Kent?
There it is.
Okay. So this is what we call a high threat, or just an interest item out there, and you can see here that, you know, it's identified. Social media, maybe something that we see is in our standard media monitoring. Someone on campus could alert us to something having happened or it could come in, maybe the on-call person receives a call from a member of the media. Well, once that's identified, and it's identified as something of a serious nature or a nature that will affect the reputation of the university potentially, that person, whoever it is that identifies, needs to call my boss, the Associate Vice Chancellor, and then myself, Director of Media Relations. At that time, we're going to discuss it and determine what needs to be done. Do we need to notify and consult with the Vice Chancellor? And then he'll determine if the Chancellor needs to be brought into it. Of course, then Board of Trustees or others. Do we send out an email to all the directors? And then we kind of put down, and here's just a list of those, just so we can look at, okay, do we have everyone covered based off of what we think has happened thus far? Mind you, right now we don't have a whole lot of information, but we know something's happened because of that initial notification. We do know that we're going to have to get in contact with the subject matter expert pretty quickly. That might be a professor if it involves a class like in this literature of 9/11, and start gathering information about what this class is, get in touch with the provost, get in touch with those who can tell us, get the syllabus of the class, all those kinds of things. Once we get that, we're bringing in the on-call person who is there at the time when the incident occurs. That person now knows that they are going to be responsible for working on a holding statement and developing a fact sheet. We have a template for that fact sheet in our little book that we provide them every night. They go home with the on-call book, and it has all the numbers that they need to have, as well as templates they need to have, and where they can find them on our line. They're also going to be monitoring. Social media is going to be monitoring, and with the social media on-call person. And these people are all going to be talking and sharing information, developing that fact sheet, and then determining, do we need to put out a release or media advisory? What background do we need to be providing to these people? And that's just the process by which we move forward as something happens. The key is just understanding that there's some key individuals and potentially a lot of people that need to be brought into the situation as it evolves. So that's one of the big processes that we put in place. Really having those fact sheets with key information developed ahead of the event has enabled us to provide approved factual information. Enable us to provide the factual information. So we'll develop the fact sheets as we know. Everyone can look out and see what issues do we think might happen. As you develop your fact sheets, you can have those available before it actually happens and have some approved language that you can use when something happens.
So Jim, when you were talking about the fact sheets, was that work done is already, you've looked at potential scenarios across the landscape, or here's the things that we anticipate could happen, so you've got those.
Right.
Tell me how the fact sheets go into the flow you've just shown. Is it verification of those fact sheets based on the particular situation you find yourself in now?
Right, and as you know, every situation is going to be slightly different. You can't have a fact sheet pre-formed for you, but you do know that you're going to have something involved with diversity and inclusion, or you're going to have something that involves potentially a campus. We had an active shooter situation. It ended up not being an actual shooter, but someone had reported that. So we know that that's something that we may have to address. So having some approved messages already written out on a fact sheet, we can go there, and we already have some of it developed. In the situation with the literature of 9/11, we didn't have anything developed, and it may be we've had other classes that have been identified by media as maybe having practices that are strange or thought to be just of issue. And so you never know what that's going to be, but you do know that academic freedom is something that is important to the university. You do know that freedom of speech is important to the university, and so you can have some language associated with that, and then you need to pull in the facts associated with that particular course. In this course, we were able to do that. But another thing that I really want to stress, though, is thinking about all stakeholders and not being blinded by the media when responding. It's easy to get blinded by all the reports coming in, or the stories that are just full of errors and full of outlandish remarks. And you need to ensure, and that's impossible for me to do. It's a full team effort. That's why we sit down, and I'll explain how we do this in a little bit in our what we call a real-time newsroom. But making sure the board of trustees, faculty, cabinet members, alumni, legislature are all informed helps to inoculate them from the stories that they will read. We know the story's coming, or we know that a story has been placed, and letting them know our side of the story. And that happens via email, it happens via phone call. Quite often it happens by letting the government relations people know everything we know, so that they can go talk to maybe the state senators and legislators that are reacting to things that they're seeing. And that's incredibly important. Having that infrastructure in place is really important. I don't know, Natalie, if you want to jump in on some of this stuff.
So some of the things that we learned on social media for that instance, and as we've gone on and had other opportunities, like I said, we always have somebody on call, and so or not call, but kind of monitoring. So that doesn't mean on a Saturday afternoon that's we're glued to our computer screen, but we're checking in throughout the day. But when big stories like this happen, other people need to step in. So it could be someone else from my team, or it could be someone who's on our content development team, or on our media relations team, or internal communications, kind of who's ever there. It's great to have somebody from the social media team who can kind of set up our platforms and help with keywords and searches, but just enable other people to help, because depending on the situation, the content that we just see comes in so fast that it's hard to get a grasp of all of it. But the other thing that we learned is the faster that we can analyze, or at least get a good reading of what we're seeing and then share that higher up, is helpful. Because as Jim said, there are stakeholders, the stakeholders I see every day are online, and they're on Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat. So that usually in my mind is my primary audience. But I had to step back a little bit and realize that my supervisor and his supervisor and Jim have different stakeholders. And sometimes, you know, they're just as important, and my supervisors would say they are more important. So as much as we can share with them what we're seeing, tell them what rumors we're seeing, tell them what facts we're seeing. If we see media questions come in via social, we work with the media relations team right away to get those addressed, either through his team or we may answer them on social media. But the situation that we were discussing now really helped me solidify that social media needs to be part of the process of drafting the responses, or at least the input and the information that we share needs to be in our supervisors' minds when they are drafting a response, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I wonder how many folks that are watching this or will watch this that have not established a good link up between their media team and their social team. Is there, how close, let's just talk about physical location, how close do you two sit to one another, and how well either did you integrate or now integrate based on what you learned from this, this particular issue?
So our offices are across the hall from each other. Our office is actually, it's an old dorm where our offices are. So many of us have dorm rooms as offices, but then there's also a room where many people work, kind of more of an open newsroom. Jim and I sit across from each other, and he'll explain in a little bit when we have a situation where we all gather, a big situation where we all gather to kind of discuss things and watch things. But the other thing is that we, you know, we have our phones with us all the time, so we're texting and group texting and sharing information that way.
If you have a question for Jim or Natalie, hashtag HigherEdLive, hashtag HigherEdLive. We've got one question before we move on to how you've changed your processes and the new system you've put in place. Tiffany from William and Mary, she was asking, what tools do you use to monitor your mentions online and on social media when you're in an issue situation?
Go ahead. I mean,
so we have used a couple of tools. We used Meltwater for monitoring last year. and now we're transitioning over to Hootsuite and Hootsuite Insights. So we use those tools and had a lot of success even the past week with Hootsuite Insights and trying to quickly figure out where the news is coming from, figure out kind of, it helps us filter out media posts really quickly that way. We also use a lot of native searches, so we use TweetDeck quite a bit. We are on Yik quite a bit. So a variety of things, but Hootsuite is the platform that we use mostly.
Right, and I mean on the traditional media side, we were with Meltwater, we're now with Cision. I mean, I think they're both very good at monitoring traditional media. They both do enough. A lot of it has to do with knowing the local market, depending on the situation. If it's a more of a localized story, you know, we kind of just know who's going to be covering it. If it's something that's going national, we'll rely on those kinds of the Cision platform to kind of help aggregate the stories that are out there. And I'll get into as well as the broadcast piece of it, and we use TBIs for that specifically. But you know, the room that we're sitting in also helps us out a lot, and I'll talk about that momentarily.
Yeah, so great segue. Let's talk about you had the first opportunity and the learnings you took from there. You showed us your kind of flow chart process of decision making and how to get to the right people at the right time and make sure we don't miss anybody.
Right.
So how did that work now once you had the plan and you had the opportunity to use it? How did that work and what else did you guys do?
Well, I mean, so let me just, I'll use that as an opportunity to talk about the pro and anti-abortion rallies that we experienced, and that was last October. It was heightened due to the national discussion surrounding the Planned Parenthood video that surfaced during the summer of 2015. Several weeks earlier than this, it was first week of October, I think it was the 6th. Several weeks before that, though, there was a pro-life chalk messages that were erased across campus by pro-choice minded students during what I didn't know this existed at the time, but National Pro-Life Chalk Day. So there was kind of chalk wars that went on across campus, and a little bit of a that situation prompted questioning from a media outlet for university comment, which we provided, and that really didn't become a bigger situation. But in early October, student groups planned competing rallies across campus, on campus. We knew that the pro-life rally was going to occur because of our student union alerting us, but the pro-choice group did not register. However, we allowed that to proceed. Our sensitivities of possible violence were heightened because of the aforementioned issues, and so we put a really heavy emphasis on monitoring the situation, bringing in public safety, bringing in student affairs, and that was just. Do you have anything to add on the social media side as far as how that evolved?
Not much. I mean, we just kind of employed our normal things, paying particular attention to Twitter and Facebook events pages, and Yik for that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is where I have the opportunity to talk about the room that we're sitting in. We stood up what we call our real-time newsroom, and I'll just show you what I'm talking about. So this room that we're sitting in, we're sitting kind of right here currently. You can see this screen behind us, but when I bring it back. But this room, we'll have a lead that sits at the head of the table, and in there, you know, there's a lot of automation. We have a tech that sits in here. Social media, so Natalie would sit. She would have someone next to her, someone that's updating their website. So as we need to make any adjustment to that, put any information out. Multimedia, you know, a writer that's there. Community relations, this is someone that can make calls to the community as something's happened if that's necessary. Government relations would be in here, we have a seat. Internal comms, content, marketing, and then media relations has 3 spots, mostly answering phones. We also would, off this, we have another room where we'd have a little phone bank kind of set up where a lot of media relations could be done and phones could be answered kind of outside the bustle of this. Surrounding us are television screens where we can monitor several stations at once, and social media. We have the capability of putting whatever is on a screen or even on a handheld. So for Yik Yak is usually you can get that on your iPhone. You can throw that up on one of the screens via the Wi-Fi. So that's different things that we can monitor right up on the screens in real time. The Hootsuite can be put up there. And then we have phones across here so that we can talk to whomever we need to. I'll get into it, but this is the communications with on scenes, and those are radios that we have. So that's the setup.
One thing I wanted to point out about that room, in the corner, there was a chair for a visitor.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And so that's been helpful in cases on kind of things that are happening on campus that require a quick response. For one instance I can remember, we had our Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs in the room, which was helpful. He was able to be here. It eliminated, one more phone call that we had to make. He could collaborate with us and help us make sure that the messaging we were tailoring to students set the right tone and included the proper information. That's not always possible, but it's very helpful when it is.
Yeah.
So the philosophy, just walk me through, make sure I got it straight in your thinking and the philosophy behind the room. So you showed your notification and decision-making process on your flow chart or notification process. So it looks like you took a conference room and you added some screens to it there and telephone communications and designated seats to get these key experts in. Is the philosophy and is the practice you bring those people in, only the ones that you need for a particular instant to fill those seats? And I assume the second part, since you both look like the answer to that was yes, the second part of that one is the reason to have a place for those experts to come to and to come to quickly to go through the decision-making process. Is that the philosophy behind it?
Absolutely. I can't stress enough. I mean, having as many of the communications decision makers in one place is critical. And even bringing in, in the one instance Natalie mentioned was when we had our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs, who was there, and a very important cabinet member that is a part of anything really that goes out. When we have situations involving students. He's someone that is important to help us craft the messages and understand what the right messages are for the students and all the stakeholders that we need to communicate with.
Well, and along those lines, I mean, what happens so frequently is if, I'm on social on a Tuesday night, for example, and I see a story or a blog post, I will text Jim and my Associate Vice Chancellor, depending on what the story is. I may text the Vice Chancellor. And then there's kind of other people that you bring into the conversation, depending on what the topic is. What this room helps us do is cut down on those texts, because while I'm texting, then Jim may be texting his team to say, I need you to do this and this. And our Associate Vice Chancellor may be texting other people to say, I need you to do this and this. And then they overlap, or it's the same thing. I mean, we may be running down the hallways conveying the same message. So just having a central meeting place where we can get together, where I can very quickly put social media up on the screen so we can see all the tweets that are being said, or we can look at Facebook posts, or as Jim mentioned, we can look at what people are talking about on Yik Yak, and we don't have to shout that through our phones or on the telephone. Everyone can see it as they continue to work. Is very helpful. It just makes things run much smoother in a crisis.
Well, and another thing it does is another point I want to make. I mean, when something erupts, so we're using these pro and anti-abortion rallies. They were in 2 different locations. That's something that Student Affairs ensured that they weren't co-located. But as something is emerging or on the ground, we will also put people out there. Quite often it's me, so I can go, if the cameras are out there, I can speak if necessary. And we need to be able to rapidly get information back to this room to provide situational awareness, and vice versa. Those in this room are going to see who is broadcasting, what local station is going live right now, or what is this journalist tweeting, or what is someone on the ground who is at the rally saying on social media that might be instigating a larger situation. That's something that Student Affairs or the Department of Public Safety may not be able to see. They've got a pretty good grasp of what's happening physically on the ground, but it's that online or on-air piece that they just don't see that we can provide on the ground, and that gets to my point about the communications, the radios that we have here. We realize that when you have large gatherings of people, I mean, it's elementary if you think about it, but when you have large gatherings of people, think about maybe your commencements, I don't know, but it's hard as heck to text each other at that point because everyone's doing it. Everyone's online. So we learned that we had to get a pretty advanced radio system with our own channel so that we can communicate all the way across a pretty large campus. So, I mean, we could be, 3/4 of a mile away from this building, but we still need to talk to it in real time. And having that radio there was something that enables us to do that, to be able to talk to, the Department of Public Safety if necessary. We're going to be on the ground with them, so as we're seeing stuff in this room, I can go over and tell the police chief, hey, we're seeing this on social media. You guys need to react to that. Same with the Student Affairs team that might be on the ground.
So the situation you're outlining for us now, did you actually have the room in place during that situation?
During that situation, we did. We had and that was one of the situations where we realized it was we didn't have radios at that time, and it made us realize that, hey, actually being able to communicate without using the phone is challenging. We need to have something else besides this cell phone that's relying on the cell towers that are being overwhelmed right now to communicate. And there were some great ideas that we had where, hey, we can Skype. Well, that really works well when you have Wi-Fi. But when you don't have Wi-Fi, it's not as, and you're out in the middle of campus, it becomes a lot more challenging. So having that immediate communications resource in a radio with a powerful radio was something that was very important to us.
Yeah, I think some universities may have thought about radios as a backup communication for big emergency situations, but may not have thought about the situation like you said. We're talking about issues management, and this is an issues where just the communicators are trying to help the leaders maintain situational awareness. So besides your radio shortfall in the room that time and the learning you got from that incident, how did the flow that you showed us on the chart in the room with those in there monitoring live media or media stream, both social and live, how did that help inform leaders and help your vice chancellor and the chancellor maintain situational awareness in this instance?
Go ahead, Natalie.
Really, I mean, it just puts everything right in front of them, so that they can see. They can see the chatter. They can see videos that students take. In this particular case, perhaps videos that the students were taking or photos of the scene. I think in this case, if I remember correctly, everything went fine that day.
It did.
And the crowds were definitely manageable. There was no issue, and so when they could see that, that could help them alleviate their concerns. In other cases where crowds may have gotten out of control, then they can see that really quickly too and have a chance to respond with or talk it out with other people that they need to work.
Yeah. I mean, just the relationships that we have with the student affairs with the Department of Public Safety and their ability to talk to rally organizers before an event actually occurs. So as we see something emerging, so sometimes it happens rapidly. In this case, we knew that one of the groups was going to be out there probably a week or two in advance, but we didn't know the other group, and we probably can anticipate that. But because we saw it on social media, Facebook page pop up, we were able to say, hey, we know about this one group. We see a Facebook page of someone else organizing student affairs. You need to be aware of that. Let them start working with those rally leaders days before the event occurs, so that when it occurs, there's some ground rules that are in place with them, and then just having us out there on site helps to create a situational awareness for everyone. As you know, within the social media realm, the tides turn so quickly, potentially.
So if you've got questions for Jim or Natalie, hashtag HigherEdLive, hashtag HigherEdLive. Tammy from Kennesaw State wants to know how you determine when to respond by either going on camera, you at the scene, Jim, or through a statement, or do you have a PR spokesperson or someone else from admin talk? In this situation, and as you were using the room, was the room and the people you had there able to help make that decision or involved in any of those decisions?
Absolutely. So when something like this occurs, we'll either have the Associate Vice Chancellor or the Vice Chancellor of Communications in the room. Likely it'll be the Vice Chancellor, although he has to come from our South building to get to this location. Depends on the situation, obviously. Nonetheless, I'll be in communication with them whenever a situation like this arises. And media relations, of course, is an art. You know, there's no science to it, unfortunately, and so every situation is going to dictate whether or not you go on camera. For this particular one, we decided that media attention was not at the level where we needed to put ourselves on camera. But I'll use another one. For example, when we had the active shooter, a potential, we thought there might be a report of an active shooter, is what I'll say. That within, I would say, 15 minutes was on CNN being reported, and obviously that's something that evolves. It actually evolved right outside of our building, and we had police pulling up using our building for cover with shotguns and assault rifles. It was an interesting morning. And obviously that generated a lot more media attention. So we did decide to announce a press conference, and we had one, and that was something that was discussed in this room with all the communications leadership present, and directly with the Department of Public Safety, and we were able to set it up rapidly where we got the police chief within probably an hour of it kind of being wrapped up to be able to talk on the topic.
So with the process and the actual location in the room, that's set up. I like the concept, and I think just the way you've set up the room there, I think a lot of folks should look at that. There's opportunities there for us to do that. You could almost do this with any conference room, and that,
yeah.
When a priority activity pops up, you can jump into here, and you've got the technology in place to enable you to do that. And you showed on your diagram, you've got the seats labeled for those key people. Here's the problem that I see that I'm going to ask you how you got over this hurdle, if you have indeed got over it, is in higher education, those of us that are in the PR business and issues and crisis management in particular, we're used to operating at a very fast pace. How do you either teach or convince those other ones who are the key experts that you need to come to the table to help? How do you teach them about that's the speed in which they need to operate when one of these issues pops up?
It's a process. It is. That's very true. I think because of the various incidents that we've had over the past year, I think by having a place such as this room and communicating across campus that this is the structure that we have in place, that helps them understand the mindset more that we are in and their need to contribute to the information gathering process. So no question, is it potentially a foreign concept to some within academia, but I would say at this university, the senior administrators certainly know that the issues arise very quickly. My experience is they've been right there for us, and others know as well. I mean, the communicators are on top of that as well. But no question, it's a process, and it's about stating sometimes what you think would be the obvious. You know, everyone knows that emergencies are going to occur, but putting it down, here are the processes that we have in place, and writing it down and talking about it, even though they may seem like, no kidding, that's what you would do, but by talking to people, sitting them down, talking to them, and saying, here is your responsibility. They may have known that was their responsibility before, but by having someone sit down with them and say, hey, here's what I expect from you if this were to happen, it kind of puts a new level of, oh, wow, I do need to pay attention to this.
And have you proactively done that? You've gone across campus to those key leaders that you think you might need in those situations before they happen to help them understand that?
We have. We want to do it more. I mean, I want to be pulling in communicators. I haven't had all the communicators in this room, and I think having the various communication directors around the campus. I mean, we have 14 schools in the College of Arts, so, and then they have teams, some of them. So as you can imagine, there's quite a few people who call themselves communicators on our campus, and I think it is important to have them come in here and just see what we have, because I understand and I can certainly sympathize with if there is an active shooter situation, they don't know what's going on here unless they come and see it and understand the processes that we are taking on.
I think getting back to the other question about like getting buy-in and getting everybody to understand urgency, I think developing that along the way when there aren't urgent situations is really helpful. And for what I do to do that is I share as much information as I can without being, annoying or filling up emails. So one thing we'll do if we have a story about a researcher's publication and their latest thing, we'll share the good news with their communicator, and we'll share the good news with that particular scientist and say, hey, we have seen on Facebook this story has gotten 500 likes. It's really taken off. So we'll share that kind of information to show them that social media has some value, and it's helping get your story out. And so doing that when we're not in a crisis, I think kind of elevates our office a little bit or helps put a spotlight on it. So then when we come back to people and say, hey, we really need you to work on this topic, or this is a really breaking issue, they kind of have some perspective of why it's important because they've seen reach before. Or on stories that haven't developed quite to a crisis situation, but we're tracking. If we can share that information with the relevant office, if it's student affairs, or if it's our HR department, and we can give them information as the story builds, they might have a little bit more perspective as well as to when the story breaks that things need to move fast.
So if you've got a question for Jim or Natalie, hashtag HigherEdLive. It's hashtag HigherEdLive. Natalie, from a social media perspective, when you all had the room in operation, when you were dealing with an incident now, did it help you both proactively or monitor social media first and get that feedback to everyone else that was in the room? But were you able to do from there what you just said, to show, hey, the messages we're pushing on social are actually working, they're resonating? Were you able to see that and give that feedback to everyone else that was in the room to inform them?
Yes, so it just, as I mentioned before, kind of being in one place, and it doesn't have to be this particular room, and any kind of room would work, but having everybody see it eliminates the need to shout across the hall or send a million texts, or if you have 15 people on a text, all the people are going to get shut out. So that just kind of eliminates that need. But what it also does is, so just like campuses across the country have an Alert Carolina system.
Or emergency alert.
Emergency, yeah. I'm sorry, emergency system. Ours is called Alert Carolina. So as Jim mentioned, when we thought we had an active shooter on campus, what we were able to do is our emergency system automatically pushes content out, like it's emergency through take shelter through our social channels. But then we were able to supplement that information when we just to put out things like campus is shut down right now, or half classes are canceled. We would just keep updating content through our Twitter, through Twitter, just to let our audiences know we are still here. Here are the protocols. Here are the things you are supposed to take, and we would see the reaction, and everyone in the room could see. So when a big message would go out, they could see that it had been retweeted, 200 times, and that's what we want. We want to push the message out further and further. So yes, when it's on a screen and others in the room can see it, it definitely we know the message is getting out there.
So you've built a room. I really like it. You've built a process. You've got to use it a couple times. I'm guessing it's not perfect. There's pieces of this you still want to work on. What are they?
We learn something every time.
Yeah.
We have one of the things that our Associate Vice Chancellor has been really big on is when we have a situation after these rallies or kind of any situation where we've had to gather or really kind of come up with a media strategy, he wants us to regroup when it's all over and learn from what we did right and then talk about what we could do differently. And so, for example, that's where I think the radios issue came up. That was one of the things. And that's a technical thing, but we could also talk about, I could specifically say, I don't think that we got enough communication out. We were tweeting, once every 15 minutes. In a crisis situation where we feel like, students might feel like they're in danger, we maybe want to tweet every 5 minutes to let them know as much information as we can. So we come back to that every time.
Yeah, I mean, my mind went straight to technology. This has a robust technology package here that allows us to do a lot of neat things, like put our computer screens or mobile phones straight up onto one of our big screen TVs. We do have an ability to Skype, but I mean, some of the things that would be neat is having a direct video teleconference line to our department or emergency operations center or to our south building where the chancellor is going to be. I mean, those are neat things that would be great to have, but that's a little bit of whiz bang there. I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my career is just being able to do the simple things is so important. And so what I know the answer it really is just being able to exercise and rehearse in a realistic manner. That's where I think we'll make our most money. I mean, we're going to continue to learn and refine our processes, but our processes are only as good as our ability to actually carry them out. So,
I think you said it perfect right there, and this is why I like everything that you all have done there. It's like we used to say in the Army, when you're in combat, the simple things are hard and the hard things are impossible.
Yeah.
These are all relatively simple tasks we're talking about from a communication perspective. But when you're in an issues or crisis situation, those become very hard to do, and all the tools and process you've outlined will help make those easier and help them go smoother. So I think you guys are on the right track here. You mentioned the link to your emergency operations center. Have you? I hope the answer to this question is no. Have you had the opportunity to have this room going and the folks there at the same time your emergency operations center had to stand up and do something?
Yes, that was when we thought we had a shooter on campus.
Right.
So we were here, they were there.
Yeah, and it was via telephone. I mean, we were able to communicate with them. But as you know, there's just challenges sometimes when you just have a telephone line there. So I mean, those are things that us being this room still is being worked into our overall emergency operations plan. As you can imagine, those aren't rewritten every single year, and social media and the speed of how fast things happen has just exponentially increased over probably even like the last 5 years.
So you talked about your process of learning after you had an event. Tiffany from William and Mary wants to know what metrics you gather after that, and is there a summary or a recap report that you do, and maybe it's just inside your communications office. Well, let me ask it that way. You mentioned you conduct a review. Is there a format you use for that after-action review? And then is there a report published at the end and shared with all of your communication staffers?
We don't have a templated report, and I think that's actually a great suggestion. I mean, that's something that we're writing down right now.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, certainly we do go over. I mean, that after-action review process is something that is something we've done. The metrics that we use for that I think that's an excellent point. We just need to outline exactly what the metrics would be for us to. And I think that's a great topic for a future PR Live.
Yeah. So one of the things, I mean, is most of us do is, I mean, we pull metrics every month, and one of the things I look for kind of the top, what really resonated. And so if we're in a crisis situation that elevates to that level, it'll make the top 5, top 10 tweets of the month that I pull in, but I don't do anything more in depth on how we handle the crisis. But I agree with that's a great.
I mean, it's something idea. worth thinking about a lot more. I mean, certainly when something happens, it's all about just getting the information out. I mean, we want to be pushing, on the social media side, something out every 15 minutes, regardless if we don't actually have an update. Just to repeat what has been said, make sure people know that we're still there, that we're on the situation. I mean, in real life, understanding what is happening, even when in that potential shooter situation that happened right outside of our building, we still aren't exactly sure what you can say or what is the reality of the situation. And so you may not get those updates every 15 minutes, but you do need to be pushing whatever you can just to keep people, keep feeding the machine, so to speak.
Well, it looks like unfortunately, these always go so fast. We are running out of time here for today. So thank you to Jim Gregory and Natalie Visueti from UNC-Chapel Hill. Thank you both.
Thank you.
It was great. Yeah, it was fun.
And as always, thanks to our program sponsors, Public Relations Society of America Counselors to Higher Education, and M. Stoner. Until next time, this is Kent Casella on Higher Ed Live. Thanks, folks.
Take care.
Bye.